You know what the nicest thing is too, Justin, is depending on how long this goes, we can be like, we're gonna take a 5-minute bathroom break.
True.
Everybody can go huddle around their kitchens and refill their sodas and their teas.
Just do like a little let's all go to the lobby kind of commercial.
Yeah, man, I want to do like those old school fireside chats.
All right.
I
Well,
think we're live.
yeah, we are live. Let's go ahead and welcome our viewers. Welcome to the very first episode of the Watchfloor. We're going to be covering specifically the national intelligence, national defense, some of the changes that resulted from the Roswell incident. We're going to do a little bit of tie-in to modern day UFO, unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP phenomenon that we've been seeing over the past, 2, 3 years. Technically 80 years if you go all the way back. But yeah, Dylan, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I got the screen up, so whenever you're ready to throw that up there.
Yep, it's up there.
Cool. All right. So my name is Dylan. This episode I'm really excited for because I think it's very interesting the timeline of events that unfolded in president statements. So, most people are familiar in 1947, there was a crash in Roswell, New Mexico. Um, some people believe there was a UFO, some people believe it was a weather balloon, some people believe the Soviets did it. But what everybody is in full agreement of is that there was some kind of crash. Uh, and this is important because the first day of the crash, Jesse Marcel, who was the commanding officer down at Roswell Army Airfield, this is prior to the Air Force even existing and will become important here momentarily, reported that he did in fact receive debris from a crash flying saucer. Um, Then some letters were sent, phone calls made, and it went from a flying saucer to a weather balloon. And then all of a sudden, back in the 90s, late 90s, the weather balloon all of a sudden had crash dummies, all types of wild stuff. But the main reason why I bring this up is because 3 months after Roswell happened, you had the 1947 National Security Act. That act resulted in the United States Air Force being created, the modern Central Intelligence Agency being created, and the National Security Council also being created, which is very interesting in hindsight. And I bring that up because within the government, especially the military, there's things called standard operating procedures, and it's called an SOP. And basically, what that means is that the government and the military will act in predetermined ways based on certain threats or evaluations, where if X happens, then we must do Y. And I bring up the fact that it's interesting that 3 months after Roswell, we ended up with three new government agencies and a whole host of other things, by the way. I would recommend looking into the National Security Act of 1947 for yourself. But we ended up getting these three new agencies, and we ended up having these new agencies investigate UFOs. Now compare that to after 9/11, 6 months after 9/11, we create Department of Homeland Security, reorganize FEMA, Border Control, all types of other agencies under DHS, and that is standard operating procedure. As I'm sure most of you have heard, what was that now, a year and a half, 2 years ago? The Space Force got created right around the same time well, not all of it, but a very minute amount of some of the UFO documents were being declassified, and the government admitting that there is something. So I bring it up because 1947 started all of this, and this comes into importance as well with how classified information and special access programs came to be. I will throw this over to Justin to let him discuss a little bit of his thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this quite a few times. The coincidence, we'll call it, around all the timing of the Space Force being announced, and then we had in what was it, August of 2020, the Secretary of Defense, or sorry, the Deputy Secretary of Defense approves or announces the approval of the establishment of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force. Um, and this is, huge. I remember seeing this announcement and I was like, okay, so now we're saying these things are real. Like the government is finally admitting there's something here. And then, of course, we went to look back. I'm going to go ahead and switch the live stream screens over in a second, but we went back and in course of doing this research for this episode right now, we see that the government has previously set up several organizations, the CIA, the Air Force Office of Special Intelligence, um, ATIC, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but they have all at different points in time, quote unquote, investigated UFOs and come to very different conclusions. Um, I guess what I am curious about is, is this a genuine is this genuine from the DoD's perspective, or is this going to be a repeat of the same, you know, committees that we've had before, where they come out after a year or so and they say, yeah, this really wasn't as important as we thought it was, or there's nothing there, don't worry about it, we have your best interests in mind. What do you think about that, Dylan?
I mean, you already know my opinion from other discussions we've had, but I mean, and again, it kind of gets into what I was going to continue on with as we go along, which so I guess to answer your question, yeah, they're not going to answer anything in my opinion.
You think
Obviously, my
so?
opinion, but I'm I'm 99% sure. People talk about disclosure and soft disclosure, hard disclosure, preparation, all of this. Um, I bring up the Space Force, and I've asked your opinion on this before, which is why did we all of a sudden create the Space Force? Because, I mean, you as a Marine vet, me as an Air Force vet, Marines fall under the Navy, and traditionally all of the DOD requirements and operations that fall under Space Force was traditionally the Air Force. So why did the Air Force go ahead and pull a Navy and create the Space Force, kind of like the Marines did, unless there's a specific reason with standard operating procedures? Like, it doesn't make sense unless you have a reason to do so. Um, I mean, we'll see. Everybody talks about Lou Elizondo and Mellon, and you know, I know Bob Lazar was on Joe Rogan, and that was a big episode. But I do not believe that anything huge is going to come about in the next couple of years. Now, I could be wrong on that. Um, but traditionally and historically, let's not forget the government called everybody who was talking about UFOs crazy tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists. And, all of a sudden 3 years ago, and everybody's like, oh, yeah, UFOs are real, man, but uh, it's probably just like some foreign military capability, even though our government says it isn't. They say it's not ours. They say all these things, but I mean, that's my opinion on it. Do you see otherwise?
uh yeah, I think you brought up a couple interesting points. So I guess first and foremost, I think that the truth, if we want to call it that, whether or not that comes out will depend on who is the one actually investigating this stuff. Um, Real quick, what I mean by that is that if we look at uh, you know, I want to say now infamous, because I consider it a report about nothing, which, thanks government for putting that out, I guess. The ODNI's preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomenon, UFOs, to everybody before the 2000s, I guess. Um, and the assessment basically is there's no mention of extraterrestrials. Um, there are there is a majority of sightings that are unexplained, and they even say like, hey, we need to investigate this further because there might be something there, but they don't exactly say what. And then kind of express their concern about foreign powers, blah blah blah. I think the issue with that is if a foreign power had technology that is exhibited in some of these sightings, some of these videos, photos, eyewitness statements, then we'd have a serious national security issue, wouldn't we? If they could, you know,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think, that was one of the more important things that, for better or worse, the report that was released, I give the analysts credit, those that are discussing this publicly, in that they are at least discussing the fact that if this is for an adversary, we have a massive issue, like a massive counterintelligence issue, a massive intelligence community issue, and a massive uh, air campaign issue with defending the airspace. So, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. They really try to play it up as, at least in the media and people trying to debunk it, or just people who try to represent themselves as knowing kind of what UFOs and UAPs are kind of about, try to represent it as if it's either our platform, which, we can't 100% rule that out because, and this would be a whole episode in and of itself, but we can't rule it out because we don't talk about our own capabilities. That is a national security issue. That is a national
Justin,
security threat. Go ahead.
you're teasing them, man, because I
I
still
know.
gotta get into how SAT programs and all of this came to be and why this is happening.
Well, I'm just, trying to address some of the arguments that people pull out of their hat when they're talking
I,
about this kind of stuff. So, yes, it could
I
be our
gotcha.
stuff. There are definitely, uh, there are definitely some problems with the theory that it is our technology and some of the things that we're allegedly trying to do with our technology against our other more modern day technologies, and why we would do those things doesn't really make a lot of sense. But that is a theory. It could be U.S. technology. It would have to be generations, I would say, in the future. Maybe two generations. What do you think? 200 years of technology advancement, Dylan?
Oh God, you're really gonna put me on the spot right
Three,
now with
5?
that.
I'm just saying, just an
Um,
average guesstimate. We're,
okay,
we're talking
so
like interstellar
so
travel.
no, you're good.
Yeah,
Actually, we can kind of address this with Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and again, going back to 1947 after World War II. Um, let's keep in mind that yeah, the Germans had V2 rockets, and well, I use we, human species, were using jets to a very early capability during World War II, but we went from propeller aircraft to breaking the sound barrier in 26 months. Um, and again, I bring that up because, this is something that I did not want to talk about now. I was waiting for a future episode, but a quick
that's fine. We could
gestalt
just,
is
yeah, gloss over it. Go ahead.
no, genuinely, basically, the Germans were running around the world digging up artifacts, collecting all types of stuff. Apparently, at one point, they had the Spear of Destiny. And I bring that up because, we had the nuke, we had jet airplanes, we were breaking the sound barrier, and, within what was it? Within basically a 15 to 20-year period, we went from propeller aircraft to putting people into space. So the technology jump in those 20 years is astounding. And I bring that up specifically because traditionally, once upon a time, people said the military tried to be at least 20 years into the future, if not 50. Um, I would say that, there's some interesting patents out there that might be another episode, or Justin might even talk about here shortly. But we have we at least have the ideas for technology that is publicly available and provable that is beyond what we comprehend with air. aircraft, effectively, just aircraft alone, not even any other type of gravity bending, time warping stuff that we have patents for. So,
Yeah, I think the last piece I would add to that, since again it would probably be worthy of its own episode or segment, is that while I could believe the theory that it is a foreign government, I mean it would have to be China or Russia because some of those smaller adversary countries, what are the odds they're going to have invested so heavily into military R&D that they have this uh, future generational aircraft. The likelihood of that is small to non-existent in my opinion. Um,
I mean, there is one. Let's be fair. There is one that has technology that can blow missiles out of the sky that won't share the technology with us. So, Iron Dome. But continue.
that's true. That's true. Um, however, uh, oh, I think I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. However, the issue that I
Was it
have
China?
with enemy adversary or U.S. technology is that if you look back to the history of UFOs, UAPs, we've had these sightings going back 80 years and in some cases even further back as far as, verified quantitative data, not just, eyewitness statements or whatever, but actual data 80 years ago that we had generations in the future technology. So that would kind of lead me away from the theory that it was something we developed unless, we conveniently discover the lost city of Atlantis or something like that. Maybe that'll be a different episode that we do. But barring any groundbreaking, world-shattering acquisition of technology like that, there's no possible way we could have developed this in the 40s or earlier unless we had access to something that was already, in an experimental state. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I
And I think
100%
yeah,
do.
that's the same for any country. There's no way they would have thought about the technology to make high atmosphere, interstellar travel, whatever possible using magnetic, energy waves, whatever. I'm not a scientist, so there's only so much I understand about the topic, but I understand that this technology is generations ahead of anything we have, even today.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, to play off of that a little bit, sticking to just the facts and then giving a reasonable assessment of those facts. I mean, Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, and our stealth bombers, the SR-71, U-2 spy plane, all of those aircraft. The CEO of Skunk Works back in the 60s, and you can look this up, said that anything you can imagine, anything that you've seen in the movies, talking about Star Wars, all of that, they had already done. And if they didn't do it, it wasn't worth their time to go ahead and try. Um, so, a lot of this stuff is interesting in that we have a national security reason for not disclosing this stuff, even if you want to talk about the energy sources of these craft and the energy sources that we have patents on and that DARPA has worked on and the government has worked on. Um, it's again tying this back to the Space Force thing. Clearly, something scared the government enough to go ahead and establish a new Department of Defense branch and also decided to at least go back on 80 years of saying this is no big deal. We don't investigate it. We're not putting money into it. We have no idea about this. And release documents like the CIA documents saying that they recovered extraterrestrial debris in Africa in the 1960s. And that's a document from the 1970s that just got disclosed back in February. So something happened recently for all of this to begin to be discussed publicly. Now, going back to what you said about other countries, is it possible that other countries have begun to reverse engineer some of this technology? If it exists, is it possible that these other countries have acquired some of our aircraft, if they exist, and begun to reverse engineer those. Can't say, but what we are sure of is that something happened, and, you know, discussing what you also had said with the report is the report throughout the history of the United States, whenever they do these investigations, overall they say nothing to be concerned. It's a naturally explained phenomenon. It's a natural aircraft we already know about. But what's interesting is the more recent report here in the past, what, year or two said, like, well, we know what a majority of them are. However, there are some we don't. So, yeah, it's interesting. Are you there, Justin? Oh man, we lost him. Justin. And hold on, guys. Test.
Okay, sorry about that.
Uh, what happened?
It was a technical issue that I was having. Sorry.
Oh, you're
Um,
good. You're good.
please, where were we?
Basically, we were discussing foreign adversary technology, whether or not they reverse engineered some stuff, and the reason for the Space Force. I
Okay, that's
know.
right. And then you were
I
talking
mean, we covered a
about.
lot.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry. We were talking about the unexplained portion of the sightings, right? In the preliminary data
Yes.
assessment. Okay.
Yep.
So I've got it on screen now, I believe. I'm just trying to pull up the exact section where they say, out of X many sightings, this many were actually explained. So bear with us for a second here.
You're good. While you do that, I know one of the things that I'm going to be covering here in a moment is I'm going to be discussing basically how our security clearance and our national security apparatus got set up after 1947, discussing a little bit about special access programs, the creation of clearances, and I really want to highlight Eisenhower's military industrial speech about how the military industrial complex basically was running the world, at least as of the 1950s when he gave the speech in 61. Um, because this is important to understand as we move forward in this. Basically, the government has created a system in which there is very little oversight of certain programs, and that is why Eisenhower gave his speech, is he was very upset with it because he was the president. He was the first president to actually be ridden out of government oversight due to these programs. And that ties into all of this because that's why you have politicians, that's why you have presidents, that's why you have multiple agencies and people say, we weren't given access, we weren't given permission. Harry Reid, I know, sat on the either intelligence chair or the Department of Defense chair and was trying to push for this. But yeah, it's an important part of this is how all of the history got set up to get us to this point.
Yeah, I think you put it very well. And just to get back to the UAP report real quick, the DIA, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, came together and said, in a limited number of these incidents, that the UAPs report unusual flight characteristics, and they don't go into too much detail there. But some of the things that were reported were errors with radar data collected from the UAPs, as in they're not showing up on radar, or the tracks are available and then they disappear when an aircraft is attempting to intercept. Like as they get closer, the tracks disappear. As they get further away, the tracks reappear. Um, as well as the craft themselves. Again, mostly eyewitness reports, some videos. The UAPs themselves are able to do maneuvers that man-made aircraft just simply aren't able to do. It would put way too much stress on the pilot. That have issues with blacking out from all the G forces, things like that, or stress on the airframe, potentially ripping the aircraft apart. Um, so again, that just kind of lends further credence to the idea that these are not man-made craft in the sense that we know them. I mean, they could be something that has been reverse engineered or captured or whatever, um, but there's not a simple, neat answer for this. It's not just to not worry about it, or that the government has this in hand, because if they did, we probably wouldn't be investigating this through the government for like the 12th, 20th, 100th time. You know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I know there's discussion about whether or not some of these are UAV drone technologies, depending on the size. Another thing that I was going to discuss a little bit is about uh, the photos that were released back in December of last year off the coast of Virginia. And, we can discuss Fravor and his sighting with the Tic Tac. Um, I know one of the other things that we had discussed, you were thinking about discussing in this show, was the nuclear component, about these things playing with our nuclear facilities around the world, playing with our nuclear navy. Um, yeah, there's a lot to it. Um, that again, uh, our government has purposely made it to where this information, if they don't want it to be released, doesn't ever have to be, and only a limited number of people will ever know about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to hijack any more time from kind of the program that we had outlined earlier. So, Dylan, if you want to go ahead and move back into the topics that we talked about before.
Yeah, that works. Um, am I am I up now?
Yes, you are up.
Cool, cool. All right, so I left off with discussing National Security Act of 47 and the creating of National Security Council, CIA, Air Force, a few other places. Um, Part of that was basically uh, creating compartmentalized information. Um, so as you see, I have the special access program wiki pulled up because this is the easiest way and it's all available, referenced, everything. And we're gonna go down to history real fast. So what's interesting is 1947, we get the Air Force, CIA, National Security Council. 3 years later, um, we have the creation of top secret information. Now, Eisenhower comes into play here in 53 when he removes the restricted classification, and they begin to change how information is stored and compartmentalized within the government. You can see they removed classification authority from 28 agencies, limited its use in 17 more. They created the three basic classification levels. And then the big one was the Pentagon created their own special access labels, preventing information from being shared generally. Now, I want to tie this in real fast to 9/11 again, because the basically, the direct correlation between 9/11 and Roswell, New Mexico is we got new agencies out of it, we had new processes out of it, we had ways to keep information secure. And part of the big thing with 9/11 was they discussed information sharing. That was part of the 9/11 Commission report was, well, all of the government agencies had a piece of the information. If we had just shared it, we could have prevented that. Um, that directly goes back to this with the special access programs and special access categories because these agencies did not want other agencies, did not want generalized knowledge within the people working in the field to know. Now, mind you, this was 53 that this was done. About 8 years later, you have Eisenhower's speech discussing the problems that he was facing now as president. And it's interesting because basically, from where I highlight down, discusses exactly how he felt, and he believes that essentially the government was creating its own mini government within the public government we know today. So what I mean by that is, the quote unquote swamp, as some Trump supporters discuss, the deep state, um, comparisons to the Illuminati, but effectively that within our own publicly elected government that answers to the people, we have a shadow government in effect that has their own agencies, their own information, their own access to technology, their own funding. Again, bringing back up 9/11, what was it? $3 trillion was missing on September 10th, 2001. Um, and Eisenhower basically said in his speech, it's an excellent speech if you go back and listen to it. A lot of people discuss it, but now that you kind of know the history of how this all came to be, it makes a lot more sense looking at through the lens as Eisenhower was the first president to watch the secret government get formed from beneath him, as well as be ridden out of government oversight. And again, he was a general. I mean, this man served in the wars. This man was our president. He was there for a lot of our technological advancements. And then he goes and gives a speech basically saying, "Hey guys, I know the places that I came from are supposed to serve us, but yeah, beware because they have gone crazy." Um, and he just gives a proper warning to the American civilians, to Americans, basically like, "Hey, beware. They have their own money, they have their own technology. There's no one watching them, and by the way, somehow this is all legal." Um, And I bring all of that up because this gets into the modern day today. So I just want to make sure we're very clear on this. We have a president of the United States come out and say that the government has now created its own secretized, militarized, black budget funded government with no oversight. You have the creation of new classification authorities that allows them to do this. And you have an event in 1947. I'm not saying an alien spaceship crash, but something crashed, causing all of this to come to fruition. You have an event in 47 that has been effectively removed from public knowledge, and that set the foundation for the last 80 years of this entire research into UAP UFOs. And again, because I'm going to kick this over to Justin here momentarily to discuss more of the modern stuff, but just keep in mind, all of this stuff did happen. And more importantly, not only did all this happen, the same government that was doing all this was criticizing and publicly shaming people using the media, which Operation Mockingbird, I'm sure we will get into how the CIA was paying newscasters around the country and the world money to push certain stories and shelve others. But our government effectively made it so that way anyone discussing this stuff, even in a factual light, would be ridiculed, criticized. and segregated from society. And this same government, not 10 years ago, was making a joke of this, and a majority of Americans made a joke of it. And now here we are within the last 3 years. You got reports coming out, you got confirmation, you have permission, at least in some category, by Lou Elizondo from the DOD to discuss this in certain ways. Um, so a massive heel turn. And again, I want to make sure people get this. This is the same government that for 80 years said this was not happening. So now all of a sudden, after 80 years of this, we're supposed to believe them because of the last two or three. Um, anyway, kicking it back to Justin with that.
Yeah, I think you brought up quite a few good points. Just looking through which slide I have here. Um, it Here we go. Okay, so this is a document available publicly on the CIA reading room. It's unclassified part of their website. You can actually look up the document number that we have at the top left of each page, and that'll take you right to this exact document that I'm talking about right here. So this is from September 1952. During that time frame, there was a large amount. I have the numbers on another slide, but it was like over 300, I think, reported UFO sightings um, in that year. And basically, the government is like trying to figure out a way to perform damage control. Um, and part of that is investigating the excuse me, my slide changed. Part of that is investigating issues arising with um, the psychological issues arising from people experiencing this phenomena. You know, right there, bullet point 8, they identify the steps that they need to take to minimize a national panic and to downplay the phenomenon in the public eye. Even though they have hundreds of reports coming in from eyewitnesses, there were people at the time taking photographs and videos, but the quality just wasn't as good. Um, and I think that the severity of the problem was really downplayed by them for this issue. Another point that I think needs to be made about this is that during the same time frame that UFOs are kind of coming to the public eye is the U.S. military was developing, the first atomic weapon as part of the Manhattan Project, which would later be used in which would later be used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now the location of the Roswell crash and the location of the nuclear test sites and the very first, one of the first nuclear capable bomber wings is also in the same area in New Mexico. You know, they're within hundreds of miles of each other. So it's very interesting to see the geographic placement of this. Go ahead and pull up this map for you. The geographic placement of, we have Roswell Army Air Force Base, which was what it was called prior to the Air Force becoming its own branch. It was originally under the Department of the Army before the Army was technically a department. And then we have an alleged location for the Roswell crash. Unfortunately, there's conflicting reports there about where exactly that occurred in 47. We have the Trinity Atomic Test Site, which is the test right before they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 45. They did this in July. I believe the atomic use was in August. And then we have conveniently located to the south of the Trinity Atomic Test Site, White Sands Proving Ground. where they've tested all kinds of experimental missiles, UAVs, weaponry, things like that. So looking at just the location, it's interesting to see as one of the data points where one of the most prominent alleged UFO crashes, sightings, whatever you want to call it, occurred, and the proximity to all these pieces of the nuclear atomic puzzle at the time, and how important this project was to the government because you know it's controversial, but it did seem to end the war. Dylan, what do you think about that?
I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, in terms of the war, you're the Marine vet, so I mean, what was it? The estimates was 500,000 would be killed if we had to take mainland Japan, right?
Yeah, something like that. I'd have to open it up and look at it, but it wasn't gonna be quick and painless.
Yeah,
It would have
I think
been a bloody
yeah.
campaign. There's no
I
doubt.
think off the top of my head, I think the estimate was 200 to 500,000 dead, and that's just KIA. But in terms of this, because I know you and I had discussed this prior, and one of the things we were going to discuss was the nuclear facilities. I hope you have it because it ties into this very well. Yeah, White Sands was the testing facility for our nuclear program. Um, Roswell, Area S4, if you're familiar with Lazar, Area 51, all of that is all in the same general area. And I bring this up because, by the way, good geospatial data there, Justin. I appreciate it, by the way, making me look real bad right now.
I mean, we got
Um,
Los Alamos. I forgot to include them on the map. That is, I believe that is where part of the development took place, the R&D.
you're absolutely right, it is, because kind of real quick, going back to what we were talking about, National Security Council in 1947, and then Eisenhower in the 50s. I believe that's when they created Q clearances, the letter Q, DOEQ clearances. Yep. Because I believe that is a Department of Energy facility. So
Yes,
interestingly
it did
enough,
become that. Yeah.
yep. And then again, they created the Q clearance at that point. Um, but in terms of the interesting fact that this happened right there at the nuclear test ground is interesting because of Fravor with the modern Tic Tac sighting was a nuclear Navy craft that we were doing, a nuclear Navy vessel, let me be clear. And then you have the reports from our own Air Force with UFOs going to our Air Force bases and messing around with their nuclear missile silos. And I know the Russians also have reports of UFOs at their nuclear facilities as well. So historically, again, because that's what we're trying to do is present the historical significance of what's going on, what has now been confirmed, meaning this information historically is matching up, meaning the government is still covering up all this. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head there. When I was talking earlier about this bullet point 8, section C, they're talking about minimizing the risk of national panic. So they want to downplay, or they want to get ahead of the media that will be coming out when people start making these sightings. Um, and they're rightly concerned about that because it seems like some of these sightings were coinciding with, again, looking at their own document from 52, um, that there's a potential that these sightings are centered around places where there are nuclear waste products, I believe is what the wording is. Um, yeah, right there. Section 5, that the present dispersal of nuclear waste products might also be a factor, right? And I mean, basically, they're saying it without saying it that some of these sightings are now occurring directly near or directly at nuclear facilities, and that's a big problem for your national security, especially when you can see an object and you can't track it on radar, or when you can track it on radar but you can't intercept it. That's a problem, right?
Yeah, it's a massive problem. And again, that goes back to air superiority. I know when I was in the Air Force, that was a major major thing, Marines, soldiers, seamen, everybody appreciates the Air Force because we can provide the superiority to make sure our troops don't get bombed on the ground. And here we are with the CIA and the Air Force and our government, as well as governments around the world, saying, "Oh yeah, we're completely vulnerable to this." And this goes back again, modern day, they're discussing, "Hey, this is a possible threat," but this threat has been around since the 50s, and here it is being proven. They're right there.
Yeah, I mean, and I think another interesting thing to come out is after the DOD announced in 2020 that they'd stood up the task force, and then in 2021 that they were going to continue providing funding, as well as the acknowledgement and tacit release of those Navy videos that I think we all know, Tic Tac, Go Fast, and I think the other one's called Fleer or something like that.
I
Um,
think it was a gimbal, yeah.
yeah, Gimbal, thank you. That then the OD and I had to release that report, the preliminary one that we already discussed. Um, and also, coincidentally, around that time frame, the inspector general basically came out and said they're going to be reviewing the DoD's handling of their investigation into UAP and make sure that they haven't been mishandling this. And I think that's an
You know,
interesting statement that they made. Go ahead.
well, remember your earlier question about whether or not I think this is going to happen. I don't trust the OIG at all. And again, as I've already proven with special access programs and compartmentalization, SCI programs, um, the OIG doesn't have access to even know if they're being told the truth because they don't have to know. So how are they going to find anything?
Right. So, kind of for our audience, to break this down, because people will say, well, that's their job. You know, this is literally what the inspector general does. They have to inspect and have access to all these programs. And while you would think that's true, um, let's put it this way: if you don't have the access or the need to know about a program, how would you know about the program? Right? If I if I don't tell you there's a party on Saturday, how are you going to be at the party on Saturday? Like, does that make sense? I mean, Dylan, I know you get it because we've talked about this at length.
Yeah.
If you go ahead.
I, I think the easiest way to do this is here. I'll break it down this way using a factual example.
Sure.
The SR-71, our supersonic jet that was doing, what was that, like 3,000 miles an hour? I think it was at what, 80,000 elevation. There were fuel leak problems to it. The only reason why anyone even knew that plane existed was because the president, in a debate, was having a presidential debate back in the 50s or 60s. I'd have to give you the exact year, but I know this part is true. There was a presidential debate. The president, who was already president, was running for re-election. He won, was in a debate, and the opponent had brought up how they were not being tough on Russia. And in the middle of a debate, the president literally discloses the SR-71 live to the public, saying, "Oh yeah, well, I have this super secret jet that can do XYZ." I bring that up because, in terms of this, with the way information is classified, the way special access programs work, the way that everything is compartmentalized, you work on your piece of the puzzle and you do not have access to the rest of it. So, the comparison that he brings up about if you don't know, you can't inspect is directly comparable in that, okay, well, yeah, there's an inspector general, but if they're literally legally not allowed to know about it, you can't even give them the information for them to inspect because just giving them the access to that information is illegal.
Yeah, I mean, and again, if our audience needs further examples, I got a pretty good one right here. So going back to, I swear this is the last time, going back to the OD&I report, the preliminary assessment, that was disappointing to a lot of people is how little information there was in there, which, let's be honest, it's a preliminary assessment. And if any of that stuff is classified, you're definitely not going to get to know about it. Uh, so looking at the scope and assumptions page here, that's hopefully being displayed. Uh, the OD&I prepared this report for the Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, the task force that they stood up, the OD&I National Intelligence Manager, as well as DIA, FBI, NRO, so on and so forth. Does anybody else notice a three-letter agency that's missing from this accreditation? Like, I don't see the
What letter
CIA
does it
anywhere in
start with?
there.
Oh,
The
there we go.
CIA isn't there. So isn't that convenient? That there is no contribution from one of, if not the biggest intelligence agency, civilian intelligence agency in America, and I think that's pretty
Completely
pretty
illegal
damning on its
agency.
own.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
digress.
Yeah. Actually, okay, yeah, the other ones. I was looking to see if there was another one in there. That's little brother, so to speak. It is.
Hmm.
Anyway.
All right. So where were we? Sorry, we got off track a little bit there.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. Go ahead. Go for it.
Well, so I mean, another part of the discussion that we'll probably have for another episode is where we're going to be talking about the R&D, research development, and the potential that our government has or has taken from another country. Who knows? Some of these exotic technologies, we'll call them, and some of the things like the patents that have shown up in the general public. You can search on Google Patents, and you can actually pull up a patent for a triangle spacecraft. Um, and I think that's just the funniest thing that somebody attempted, whether it was the government, whether it was a private citizen, a hoaxer, whatever, that somebody actually tried to patent a triangle spacecraft. Like, think about that for a
Uh,
second.
that was actually that was
Go
actually
ahead.
patented by the Navy. That patent was
So
by the Navy.
I know the Navy has some that have been tracked back to a scientist by the name of I can't think of the spelling, but it's like Pais, Pais, or something like that.
Yes. Yep.
So I know he's
Yep.
one of them. This one that I'm about to throw up on the screen, kind of tease our audience. I'm not sure where the provenance of it is because it says it's from Puerto Rico is the originating.
Oh.
Uh,
Oh,
yeah,
Puerto Rico. Really?
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Interesting. That's
where
very
we
interesting.
have a lot of our science and industry.
Yeah, Puerto Rico famous for their aircraft technology and
Yes, cutting
capabilities.
edge, cutting
100%.
edge. um, so I mean, I think what other points do we want to cover for this first episode? I think we've hit quite a few, and
Um, I was gonna do the Virginia Beach one real quick, as I
yeah,
think the
sure.
Virginia Beach
I
issue.
think I also have some audio visual stuff because I am a visual learner and I love crazy, weird phenomenon videos, photos that you can actually see the proof. Pictures worth a thousand words, they say. But go ahead and take it away, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yep. Am I live?
Let me flip you over here real quick,
Cool, cool.
and you're good. Okay.
All right. So, just real quick, I pulled up article just discussing what was going on. This was from this past May. Scrolling down in this article, you have here Fravor Dietrich spoke about the so-called quote-unquote Tic Tac video from 2004, while former Navy pilot Ryan Graves described seeing UFOs every day for at least a couple years in the restricted airspace off Virginia Beach. If we scroll down a little bit, there's the triangles that have been released, one of the videos. That's not our primary concern or focus for this specific portion. This is this wonderful photograph. This is reported to be a UAP UFO that was taken from a fighter cockpit in Virginia in 2019. I bring this up because going back to the discussion about the UAP task force and the government disclosure to the extent that they are doing this, let's just keep in mind, everybody, that in this own article, they admit that there are UFOs off the coast of Virginia Beach for at least a few years. Who knows the exact number of years? But we have photographic evidence. We have reports from pilots. These are people that have fought wars. You have radar and ATC analysts that have tracked a UFO off the coast of Virginia doing 300 miles in a matter of seconds. You have effectively 100% proof that there is something off the coast, has been there for a long time. We have multiple eyewitness accounts, we have multiple sensor confirmations, and we have a government that up until about 2 years ago said that this wasn't happening and there's no evidence to support it. So my question is why should we trust them with what they're telling us now when for 80 years they have lied to us and for 80 years they have hidden the truth within their own agencies to where somebody somewhere has some pieces of information that no one's ever allowed to know about and there's nothing we can do about it. Oh God, did Justin disappear again?
Sorry.
He did.
No, no,
Oh,
I'm
you're
here.
good.
Do we want to show some of the videos that we're talking about here, or what would you like to do? Because I mean,
I
obviously
mean,
the
we
the Go
can.
Fast Gimbal, Tic Tac, Go Fast
Well,
Gimbal,
yeah.
and the other one. Good.
No, absolutely we can. I mean, I know the one, I believe it's the gimbal video where it turns on its side, which is really interesting because you can go back and listen to Bob Lazar, he claims he was a scientist working at Area 51, specifically S4. But what's interesting about the one video is the aircraft that is on the FLIR, on the infrared, from the jet that's filming it, you actually see the aircraft perform a maneuver that Lazar was talking about decades ago, back when everybody said, this isn't real, people are crazy, go put on your tinfoil hat. Congratulations, go America, yay, let's go Bucks. So, we absolutely can. I see no problems with it.
Okay. Then if we want to take a second, also one of the other Navy pictures I wanted to throw up real quick. Let's see. Oh, well, that's interesting.
What's interesting?
Okay, there we go. I think you'll remember this one. We've previously discussed it and seen it.
I
Can
don't see anything, sir.
you don't see anything?
No, I think it's still showing
Oh,
my article.
it's gonna take a second. There's a delay.
Ah, okay.
But it's the one where he's in the cockpit looking forward. You should be able to see it now.
Yeah, I do. Yep, that's the
Uh,
same. That is actually the same picture set that I had shown that was blurry. Um, yeah,
is that
that's
the
off
one?
of Virginia
So
Beach.
was it the one where he's looking up? Is this uh, the same series of photos?
So, from my understanding, with the
Uh huh.
documents that were released back in the over winter, was there were three pictures that were released. That was one of them, and then the picture that had shown up earlier was also part of it. If you actually look at the picture that I had up compared to that one, you can actually see the frame of the aircraft. So, yeah,
Okay.
from what they have disclosed, yeah.
Man, that's wild. All right. Well, not to hog up too much time on this one, but do you have the video that you wanted to present?
I do not.
You do not? Okay. I have a
I
couple. It's just gonna take me a second to pull that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think you'll like this one. One of the ones I showed you previously. So this one. Come on, mute. Oh, okay, I can't mute it. Cool. So that one in the bottom right corner with the man that sounds like he's about to die is also on military.com under the heading TR3B Triangle Spacecraft.
Going back to that patent from Puerto Rico.
And
Unreal,
now while
man.
that one's going, you have another aircraft spotted in Amsterdam, I believe that says, in the top left.
Yes, that is, as it says, Amsterdam. Do you happen to know what years those were?
I want to say the top left is 2016, but I can actually pull it up here in a sec.
Interesting.
And then the bottom
Um,
right, I am not sure about the date.
yeah, you're, just curious. I know. I mean, you're aware. I saw one myself in Virginia Beach. Um, so
Oh.
just curious the time periods.
So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it there because I mean it's just
Wow.
more of the same.
Yeah. Now you're good. Um, I think. I mean, realistically, I know we had discussed possibly discussing the nuclear silos, nuclear facilities with the Air Force. I know we had found the video you were looking for, and I only got to watch part of it. I need to watch the rest of that video. Um, is there anything really else? I mean, there's so much to discuss, but it was really, I think our goal was to outline the historical aspect of all this, and what's going on today is interesting to say the least.
Yeah, no, I think we are at a good natural stopping point. There is one more video I wanted to show because we know we primarily talked about the air threat, I guess we'll call it, from these objects. But
Yep.
there's also, now a video sighting of one of these aircraft submerging and disappearing,
Yes.
which means it's now an underwater threat, right? Or a potential underwater um, object, contact, whatever you want to call it.
So the Navy refers to them as USOs, unidentified submerged object. In fact, interestingly enough, that's another one that historically, and there's documents out there supporting it, the Navy has been encountering these things for, I think one of the earliest reports I had read was 76 or 72. Um, but the Navy has been semi-aware of there being a craft that is able to go into the sky and space and also into the ocean, and follow them. So, yeah, that's actually a really interesting video. I'm sure people have seen it, but if you haven't, yeah, if you want to go for it, Justin.
Yeah, I have it already playing for the audience, and I mean, you can tell that it was recorded directly from, like, it's a raw recording from whatever sensor or station, or it's a video file from a sensor or station. So, as far as authenticity is concerned, I mean, it looks legit.
Yeah, I know the news had played it too. I think this was one of the confirmed like releases from the DOD.
Yeah, and there it goes. It disappears. And I believe that's the end of the video. Yep. All right.
Well,
So I think we've come to the natural conclusion of our program. I think we've
yeah,
talked long enough for our show here. Um, it's really been a pleasure. I hope our audience engages with us. Obviously, we mentioned this on the intro video, which will be available shortly. But my name is Justin. I'm a military veteran with experience in the intelligence community. And Dylan and I kind of talked about this program for a while, and we're just now getting it off the ground. It's called the Watchfloor, and what we're going to be doing over the course of days, weeks, months is kind of investigating conspiracies that are interesting to us, as well as looking at, you know, present day uh, politics, national defense issues, intelligence issues, and other things of that nature. Dylan, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Just anybody listening to this, thank you for listening. It doesn't matter when you listen. If you have any comments, any suggestions, we are more than open to hearing. This is the first time we've ever done this. Um, and yeah, I'm happy to be doing this with my buddy. And I appreciate you guys listening. Looking forward to continuing this. I think I think we'll be doing this for a while. I actually like the idea of us doing this, and hopefully we get some interaction with people as this progresses down the road and it strikes a chord with people. So, yeah.